Thank you.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of Derby City Council Cabinet, Wednesday the 9th of July at 4 o'clock. We are all assembled, so I'll start with the agenda and take any apologies first, Karen.
I've got Rachel North and Councillor Smale.
Okay. Late items. I don't believe there are any late items.
There are none.
Receipt of petitions, item 3. I don't believe we have petitions either.
No, we don't.
Okay. Identification of urgent items to which call-in will not apply. I don't believe there are any of those either.
That's correct.
Okay, which takes us to item 5, which is declarations of interest in relation to today's agenda. Any declarations? I'll take the silence as there being none. And that leads us to item 6, the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of August, which I've read and I'm content with. Can I have a seconder, please?
Seconding.
Thank you. Which takes us on to the recommendations from executive scrutiny last night, of which there are a number, but as we normally do, I intend to take those recommendations alongside each particular item, if that's okay with everybody, which leads us straight into item 8, adult social care, your life, your choice strategy.
Thank you, Chair. Shall I pick that up? It's Andy Smith. Yeah. Thank you. The purpose of this paper is to put to Cabinet the revised Your Life, Your Choice strategy following a consultation which Cabinet agreed to carry out in October 2019. The vision and strategy, which is attached as Appendix 2, sets out the Council's principles and approach to meeting the rising demand for social care and the key focus for adult social care over the years ahead. Whilst it's not statutory to have a statutory requirement to have a strategy, it is considered good practice to set out our vision and approach to how the Council discharges its duties under the Care Act 2014. And in fact, this strategy updates the first iteration of the strategy, which was published back in 2015. The consultation was open to anyone in Derby using a variety of different methods. The summary of the consultation response is included in Appendix 3. The majority of the feedback was very positive and summarised at paragraph 4.3 of the report. Section 4.4 of the report highlights the few areas where we want to build on and strengthen the user's experience. It's also worth noting that there is a lot to be learned from the response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the approach taken by our community hub developed with the voluntary community sector, whereby communities, neighbours, family and friends played a significant part in supporting vulnerable people at the height of the pandemic. This builds on the Council's long tradition of local area coordination, which works with people's assets and strengths. So I would ask Cabinet to support recommendation 2.1.
Muted, Chris.
Sorry about that, 50 pence in the box. This was considered executive scrutiny last night, out of which came 2 recommendations. If I deal with second recommendation first, which was to recommend that the strategy be provided to the Adults and Health and Scrutiny Board, a further paper on that. Well, it's not for me to dictate what the Adult Health and Scrutiny Board want to use as a project, so we can certainly agree that if that's what they want, that's what they shall have. Andy, did you want to deal with the first recommendation in relation to the inclusion of the use of assistant communication devices? Thank you.
Yeah, I can, Chair. So the strategy already references our ambition to increase the number of people who make use of technology-enabled interventions, practical aids, equipment, home adaptations, and things like that that basically help people live independently for longer. It's implicit that this would include things like assistant communication devices, but would be happy to propose to Cabinet that we make this more explicit and it's accepted as part of the recommendation to Cabinet from scrutiny.
Okay. Any further comments or questions in relation to this paper? No. In that case, it's just recommendation 2.1. Can that be agreed?
Accepted.
Accepted.
Okay, good. So be it. Let me have a look. Let me get back to the agenda. Because item 8 is the allocations policy for 2020 to 2025. Who's going to present this for us, please? Matt, is it you or
Matt? Yeah, Matt. It's Matt today.
Sorry, I was on mute again. Sorry. Yeah. The existing allocations policy was written and implemented in 2013. Allocations are governed by Acts of Parliament and guidance which is issued. We've taken account of these in writing the policy, including the Homeless Reduction Act and the new duties that are placed on local authorities to prevent homelessness and, where this isn't possible, to relieve homelessness. The current allocations policy operates with two bands, which are an emergency band and a general needs band. The new policy introduces a third band to assist the local authority with our priorities. So we've now got a corporate initiative band, a priority band, and a general needs band. And the corporate initiative band, that will assist us with care leavers, with foster carers, adopters, and move on from supported accommodation. And the move on from supported accommodation is a new need that is being given priority within the allocations policy. There has been various stakeholder events that took place between July and December of 2019. We've done consultations with councillors, statutory agencies and departments within the local authority, as well as the voluntary sector. Done a full public consultation between February and June of this year, with 120 comments received back, and the feedback has been reviewed and incorporated within the policy where appropriate.
Thank you, Matt. There were 3 recommendations that came out of executive scrutiny last night. Councillor Webb, I don't know if you want to deal with those, or do you want Matt to deal with those? We have discussed those earlier. Councillor Webb, are you there?
Sorry, Chair, I'm struggling with the technology. I was muted by somebody.
Okay, well, you're on now. Let's say the 3 recommendations that came out of scrutiny. Did you want to deal with those, or are you happy for Matt to give
Can you take me through them one by one? So the first recommendation from scrutiny
is to recommend that council cabinet that young people who were living in Derby under the care of another local authority should be given priority in terms of having a local connection as they leave care.
Now that needs clarifying, because under the legislation, those people in care that are from Derby, so born in Derby, and in care elsewhere, so anywhere outside Derby, are automatically given access to the housing with a local Derby connection. However, if we have somebody placing people from outside of Derby into Derby, then it is that other authority i.e. the authority that is placing someone in care in Derby. It is their responsibility to provide housing and housing connection when they leave care. So I need to be assured that clarity has been given on that particular recommendation so that we are keeping up with the legislation.
So we need to be compliant, but in principle we should look after the people in care anyway, shouldn't we? Matt, did you have any, and we discussed this earlier on, did you have anything to add to Councillor Webb on this first recommendation?
I don't think I do, Chair. I think it's I think the way that I've now got sight of what is written, and I think that it is about the young people in the care in the city rather than other local authorities, young people that are placed in the city, that is intended to be written and recorded as part of this recommendation.
Okay, well, I think subject to clarification, then it's something that we should support. So
we already do that with people that are in care in Derby that are Derby residents. Externally, so those Derby residents that are placed externally automatically get that preference with regard to housing.
Okay, but
Chair, can I have the word?
The recommendation does talk about young people who were living in Derby under the care of another local authority. So some clarification. Councillor Barker, you wanted to?
Yeah, it was just exactly that. That.
Okay, I think we lost you there, but I think you were confirming that that was the point you were going to raise, yeah? Okay, as a third recommendation, the second recommendation is to Council Cabinet that the policy clarifies the difference between someone sharing facilities within a recognised house in multiple occupancy and somebody staying with friends on an ad hoc basis when assessing them for a priority need band.
And that one again needs clarity because house in multiple occupation automatically gets put on the list. Those that are sleeping or temporarily residing at somebody else's property would have an automatic right, bearing in mind that potentially they are homeless.
Okay. Go on, Matt, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I'd just add that that sharing facilities comes from there are 4 reasonable preference groups which we must give reasonable preference within the allocations policy for. One of those is in sanitary and overcrowded housing conditions, and within there is the sharing facilities. The wording that is used within the allocations policy is lifted directly from what that guidance is that local authorities must provide reasonable preference for.
Okay. So the third recommendation then follows on from there. It says, and to recommend to Council Cabinet that the policy clarifies whether age is or is not a fairness factor. Now, I'm not clear when it talks about age. Is that age of the property or age of the potential tenant?
Age of the potential tenant, Chair, okay. And we have to have an age policy. You cannot go on the waiting list below the age of 18, and there are some specialist properties whereby age limits apply. So we do 50, 55, 60. So those age limits apply in specific circumstances if the properties are to be allocated to that specific age group.
But this seems to want clarity into whether that age is or isn't a factor, a fairness factor.
It is fair because we have to put in sheltered accommodation, for instance, and the age limit there would not make it a general needs housing issue, so it would make it an age issue, and that is the situation that we have. It's an existing situation, and we do our best to keep those sheltered schemes and any other age limited schemes well under control.
Okay, anything to add, Matt Palmer?
Yes, please, Chair. Just to say that, having clarified this with legal, that the wording that I was given by legal was that it is a proportionate act to achieve a legitimate aim, and it makes it non-discriminatory. So because we're trying to separate a vulnerable group from a non-vulnerable group, and legally that is absolutely fine to do that as far as legal were concerned.
Okay, so for clarity, we could add something to that effect in. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Can I check with Councillor Repton, does that answer your understanding of these recommendations from last night?
Yes, yes it does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then in that case, any other questions or comments?
Can we just check, are we accepting those 3 recommendations, just for clarity?
Yes, subject to clarification.
Clarification
Of the legalities, just to make sure we do it legally. Then what we're doing is legal, yes, and with that caveat for clarification on the 3rd one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So, if there's no other hands or questions or comments, we have to look at approving 2.1, the recommendation to approve the strategy subject to those recommendations. Can that be agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, good. So moving on from there, I'll go back to the agenda. And the next on the agenda is the item 10, the compulsory purchase of empty homes, and that's the last key decision. So who's going to present this for us, please?
Thank you, Chair. I can pick this up. It's Ian Fuller.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you. So I know members very much share our view that an empty house at this point in time is very much a wasted resource, particularly when there's shortages of housing both at a national and local level. Members will be quite familiar with this report. We typically bring 2 or 3 of these up every year. You'll be also familiar with the amount of support that we will give owners of empty properties in terms of helping them to bring empty properties back into use, whether that's just giving general help and advice. We've negotiated discounted rates with a local auction house, and we also provide interest-free loans to help with the financing of bringing empty homes back into use. If all of that fails, however, it is very important that this authority has teeth, if you like, or a stick to ensure that if owners of empty properties do fail to engage with us and do fail over a long period of time to bring an empty home back into use, that we can then still take action and ensure that the house is brought back into use, and we do that through compulsory purchase order. This particular report is asking for members' authorisation to pursue compulsory purchase proceedings on 5 different properties. From our previous experience, if members authorise this, we would anticipate that probably only 2 or 3 of those properties would go all the way to compulsory purchase, with the others being moved forward by the owners once they become aware that Cabinet has authorised a CPO. In the case of these 5 properties, all of them will have been empty for at least 3 years. All of them will be subject of complaints from neighbours, and the owners will have consistently failed to engage with our officers and to demonstrate in any meaningful way that the properties are in the process of being brought back into use. And therefore, Chair, I recommend the recommendations 2.1 and 2.2 to members to enable us to proceed with these CPOs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. This again was considered last night at executive scrutiny, and quite rightly they noted the report, but also added that they wish their thanks to be conveyed to the team in the work that they're doing, and encourage this type of activity to be expanded as far as possible. We certainly echo that, Ian. We appreciate the difficulties that some of these scenarios present, but we've had you've had considerable success in this department, and it's added to the housing stock available for the city. So if you convey that to the team, we'd appreciate that.
Thank you, Chair.
So in answer to the Exec Scrutiny Board, we can certainly agree those 2 recommendations. Any comments, any questions on the report itself?
If I may, Chair. Sorry, I'll concede to whoever that was.
I'll take Councillor Holmes first.
Okay, no problem. Just to say, Chair, that 7.1 through to 7.6, I think it is, really interesting information and background for anyone to look at, and obviously gives us a really strong sort of value for money check and balance. But actually, I think it's information that'd be very useful to get out there for the public to understand why we do these things, the costs involved, and what the process is. So I know that these kind of things are reported about, council purchasing homes and that kind of thing. But I think it would be useful maybe for the comms team to explore ways of getting specifically that kind of information out there, because I find it very interesting, and I think the public will too.
I think we can certainly arrange that. Yes, it should be a very positive story situation to be reporting on. And if somebody else was going to, I think, make a comment here.
Yes, Councillor Skelton.
Skelton.
Just to say, yes, I think the team do a fantastic job. Over the years, I've had issues in my ward with some houses that have, for various complicated reasons, usually been left empty and just left to rot. I know, obviously, neighbours, it can be a huge cause of problems to neighbours from sort of antisocial behaviour with other people going into back gardens and then going into other people's back gardens, or just sort of vermin and things like that. So neighbours do have to put up with quite a lot, and it often takes a number of years before we get to the stage of compulsory purchase. But yes, happy to report there's one in my ward that didn't have to be compulsory purchase, but now is in the process of being renovated. But the team obviously have been regularly in touch with the owners of that property, who have obviously now sold it. So they really do some very good work all across the city. So thank you very much.
Okay, in the absence of any other further questions or comments, can we, Cabinet, agree recommendations 2.1 and 2.2?
Agreed.
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 Okay. Takes us on to item 10 then, item 11, the Q1 financial monitoring for general fund. Simon, is that going to be yourself?
Yes, Chair. So, thank you. What we have here is the Q1 budget monitoring report. It highlights our spending forecast for the rest of the financial year to the 31st of March for the revenue budget, the capital budget, the dedicated schools grant, and also the HRA. And maybe just to bring out some of the headlines in the report, the council is forecasting a year-end outturn overspend at the moment of £8.330 million, of which the majority is in respect of demand for children's social care, and in paragraph 4.2.8 to 4.2.15 there's quite a lot of narrative in the report talking about the increased demand of looked after children. Some of that is coming from the COVID issue, the issue of market sufficiency in respect of we still have to unfortunately meet this demand by looking out of the city in independent foster care and residential placements. And we've got a whole series of initiatives to try and provide more provision within the city. And also, I think some of the issues which everyone is facing in respect of COVID has created some delays and backlogs within the looked after children cohorts, where we would normally expect more children to be exiting the care system than is currently the case. So I think the report tries to honestly paint a picture of those three dynamics, but also recognise that the children's social care pressure is being faced by probably every council across the country, and we're all trying to find solutions to this ever-increasing demand or need. In terms of a capital budget, we've spent just over £10 million against a budget of £183 million. In the report, it details that a number of the areas, such as schools and that, wouldn't be spending money before Q1, so the profile is always in the later quarters of the financial year, but there is a need to make sure that we look at the delivery against the profile and make sure that these capital schemes are delivered as much as practically possible. But again, there's some dependencies with external funding and the funding agency's ability to also engage with this. In terms of a dedicated schools grant, there's a small overspend forecast on the high needs block, which has been a pressure that the dedicated schools grant has been facing for a number of years. And again, the report details some of the work that we're doing with parents and partners and schools to try and bring in new solutions to meeting the needs of that particular cohort of children. The report also details the current performance and collection fund, which is our collection of business rates and council tax. And currently our collection is doing reasonably well against where we thought we might be with the impact of COVID, but we will have to see how that plays out in the next 2 to 3 quarters. And I think we highlighted in a report to Cabinet in June that we thought that collection rates would be down compared to where we were last year, and that is pretty much a direct impact of COVID. The housing revenue account is forecast to deliver as planned, with a drawdown of the HRA reserve of £4.5 million. So that is, if you want to call it, the regular update of the report. The report also provides more information on the COVID forecast, where a mixture of expenditure incurred to date, forecast for the future, both in respect of expenditure and also in respect of income, is that we're forecasting that we may have spent as an authority £28.7 million by 31st of March next year on our COVID response or the impact on the council. We've currently got 17.3 million from the government, with a promise for more in respect of an income guarantee and also collection fund, and we are also lobbying for additional funds from central government to help us with our COVID response. National statistics show that our spend on COVID response and the gap that has been created, that Derby has well managed its COVID spend, and the outcomes that we got both in community, working with the social care sector, working with CCG, the waste service, again, I think a testament to targeting that money where it made the difference. But looking forward to next year, which is in the last part of the report in section 4.10, the impact of both the demand pressure we're experiencing social care at the moment, the atypical demand pressure, and also the scarring that might happen from COVID means that there is a budget gap identified for the next year. And in looking at how to respond to that, it's sort of I think we've got to look at the balance between what the government will hopefully give in the spending review to help local authorities in these unprecedented times, and we will not know that until the comprehensive spending review in November. What we can, in a sense, rebalance as a city to make sure that the impact on income, the impact on demand from COVID is minimised, and also what income generation and savings we might have to make. In order that we consult on the most comprehensive picture, it is proposed that we will issue an MTFP for consultation in December. That's probably 6 to 8 weeks later than normal, so we can pick up the government funding announcement, which I think will be shaping, if you want to call it, and informing how we respond to that gap. So the MTFP section at the back talks about a series of outcome-based options we're trying to do, because the budget gap is of such a size that you will not achieve it through a traditional salami slicing or incremental approach. And the Cabinet and the officers are working on a series of options. They've started already and will carry on up to December to try and create that balanced MTFP position, while looking at the impact on services, looking at the recovery plan of the city, and also we are hoping being able to look at it over a number of financial years, whereas our obligation at the moment is to achieve a balanced budget in year. So as I said at exec scrutiny last night, this is a transparent and quite a detailed report, but we have to recognise that in this year, with all the impacts of COVID, demand pressures, budget pressures, and other impacts on our priorities and our budget, these figures could change, and we will be bringing in the quarterly monitoring reports, updates to the projections that we have, because what we can say is this is an unprecedented year on Council's financial sustainability, but all the national statistics show that even though we are forecasting a pressure and a gap, that actually our position is more favourable than a number of our neighbours and a number of other Mets and unitaries around the country. So with that, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions along with any of the other officers here about the content of the report.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. I've got one or two people indicating they want to speak, but I'll deal with the recommendation from last night firstly, and that was that the Executive Scrutiny Board recommended to Council Cabinet that if lower waste levels mentioned at 4.2.25 reflects high recycling performance, and noting the recent addition of aluminium foil and food trays to the blue bin collections, the Council uses these facts to encourage further recycling by citizens across the city. Well, clearly, recycling is extremely important to the city. We've made some headway on that, and those two examples that are quoted there are positive, and we should absolutely use them to promote recycling in the city. Unfortunately, we don't got Rachel or Councillor Smale here, but Karen, can you advise them that this was agreed at full council and ask them to action it?
Of course.
Okay, Karen. So we can agree that, and that's dealt with that, and dealt with any recommendations from exec scrutiny. So I think it's probably Councillor Skelton that indicated first. Councillor Skelton, did you want to contribute?
I've actually already spoken, but it was actually for another item.
All right, okay.
It was Councillor Shanker.
I was just one thing going to say. Obviously, the COVID has created a situation that none of us would have wanted with our finances. and talks in different parts of the report about having to dip into reserves. That obviously can be maybe done this coming year, but that's not something that can be done in a repeated situation the following year, is it? I'd just be interested to know Simon's thoughts on what we need to do to make sure we'd never get into that situation.
Thank you, Councillor Skelton. We have at the end of the last financial year £84 million of earmarked reserves and a general fund balance of 10.9 million. So we do have a level of reserves that allows us to meet the immediacy, as I think you've talked about. And in the earmarked reserves, there was a budget risk reserve that obviously was to try and smooth some of the impact of a medium-term financial plan over a number of years. And we were in a position in February where we weren't doing any recurrent use of that reserve before COVID, and I think that's quite an important point to make. We can probably see through this year with, if you want to call it, those reserves that can be easily tapped into in terms of budget risk reserve and, if necessary, some of the general fund balance. And my report to Council in February and the Section 25 report gave some of that headroom that could be used. Obviously, we weren't planning that. I think if we were to go into the next couple of years of the MTFP and the city suffers a significant scarring in terms of income levels from the impact of COVID and people not coming into the city, or a continued high demand for children's social care, which has come from COVID but could continue into future years as that cohort is there, then the call on reserves would be significant, and we would have to have a look at how we can deliver the balanced budget. But we will be looking at the reserves in total to see whether any of those can be rescheduled. But our hope is the government will not just rely on local authorities drawing down on reserves and pushing the problem into the long grass, but actually they will support us in giving us either increased flexibilities and or additional money that allows us to take the proper and pragmatic and sensible approach to managing our medium-term financial strategy over the medium term, not in a year-by-year basis. So hopefully that gives a bit of context, Councillor Skelton, to your question. But yes, I hope the government does give us some flexibility, because I think that will help us to regain the financial sustainability that I think COVID has, in a sense, pushed every council off course a bit.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Councillor Skelton, for the avoidance of doubt, we share your reticence about the use of reserves. We will be with officers looking for alternative ways of funding the situation, but I have to say our measured approach to the use of reserves is a big contributor towards the fact that our position is, whilst not good, and there is a large deficit, it could have been worse, and other authorities have fallen foul of using reserves to a greater extent than we have done in the past. Councillor Schenker, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points and a couple of questions to raise and hopefully get answered on the revenue budget, the capital budget, and the reserves has just been mentioned. I'll start with the capital budget first, because it may be the easiest one to deal with, and it's not very far in the report in the summary at Part B, and Simon's just briefed. It says the £183 million that was set at the budget at the beginning of the year, we've only unfortunately spent £10 million of that, and there was some commentary on why that is, because of spend happening later in the year. But we're at this stage estimating we're going to spend £176 million. Is there anybody on this call who actually believes that figure? And what confidence have we got in delivering that? Because I would suggest we'd probably be somewhere between 50 and 60% of our capital budget, as we have been for a number of years. So, you know, I think it's a time where we just need to take a real honest look and make sure when we write these reports, Chair, and improve these to come to Cabinet, they're realistic. Because, okay, I'll just put that question to Cabinet really. Is there anybody who thinks we'll hit 176 million for capital spend for this financial year?
And I think I can make a comment on that, Councillor Shanker, because you know that I share your concern about the capital underspends on capital budget. It's been one of my issues over many years, and I raised it at every opportunity. But the bottom line is there have been changes that have meant that pressure has come on top in terms of spending that capital budget this year, but we are still in a position of a capital budget that was largely inherited when we came into the authority. But because we are concerned about that spend, Simon knows and probably will be able to expand on the fact that we intend to review that capital programme and bring it much more into reality, as you suggest. Simon, did you want to comment on the capital spend?
Yes, as the leader has said, it's been a very clear, not just desire but also action from the administration to look at the capital ambition, look at the capital deliverability, look at the funding which is coming, and also to better profile in the financial year, because it's not necessarily the spend at this point in time, but it's trying to say, have we got the confidence for the next 3 quarters? Councillor Shanker is right, and the leader has said that in previous years we haven't been up in this sort of 80% plus of delivery of the capital programme, and that review may actually, as you've seen in recent months, looking at capital schemes and saying, are they still viable, are they still the right priorities? And that might mean that the original approved budget in February of 183 million may change as schemes are taken out and or schemes brought in. But we will be reporting that in Q2 and Q3. And again, the explanations and reports aim to be transparent about why there would be a change in the capital budget for the financial year.
Councillor Ralston, your portfolio, anything to add?
Simon has openly explained that we fully identified this as an issue. I agree with Councillor Shanker that we've, as a city, for many years, our capital projects spend in and budgeting hasn't been ideal. A review was planned and requested pre-COVID, and then COVID hit. So we have to admit that it has been delayed somewhat more than we'd like, but we know that this is a priority for us to get back on track and to be more realistic. And I think the impact of COVID and the situation of the economic future for the city will have some major or some significant changes in the coming months, but that's part of the budget review. It's something we're all working towards.
Thank you. Second point, Councillor Shanker.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just going back on there, I just wish, if that's the case, and we've got the Cabinet Member for Finance agreeing, we've got yourself as the leader agreeing, we shouldn't be publishing the figure, which we've got no confidence we're going to be looking at. But hopefully the review will pull that out, highlight that out, and the Q2 outturn report will give a more
I appreciate what you're saying, Councillor Shanker, but until we know, until we have done that review, that is the current situation of a capital programme that has been in the train for a number of years.
Chair, if I may, just to input really. I think Councillor Wilson's obviously explained it, but we were very close. We were very advanced towards that review. Had it not been for COVID, we'd be having a very different conversation right now, because that piece of work would have either been completed or very much underway. And so for us, absolutely committed to moving forward to clarify everything that's being debated, to be honest with you, and in terms of the capital spend.
My point being, we will be nowhere near 176 million come the end of the financial year. Moving on to the revenue budget and the position we're in, we're forecasting already a £8.3 million overspend, which I think Councillor Eldred at the beginning of the financial year predicted more provision should have been made and that wasn't based on what we'd spent in people services in previous years. So it's not a surprise at all to say we're already predicting an 8.3 million overspend for this financial year. I think the writing was on the wall prior to that. But worst case scenario, if that comes true, or if that's worse than 8.3 million for this financial year, we don't get the amount of lost income for in relation to COVID that we're hoping we would get from government to meet the shortfall in our COVID spend. My sums tell me that we won't have enough money in reserves to make up that shortfall. Have I read that correct?
So I'm going to ask Simon to respond to that in terms of the availability of reserves in that event, but so far government have said they will pay, and so far they have paid, so we'll have to see how that all pans out. Simon first, but then I'm going to ask Andy Smith, if it's okay, if he has any comment in relation to the predictability of overspending children's services. Simon first.
Yeah, so firstly, the council has reserves which are stated in misstatements of accounts and the budget report. As I replied to Councillor Skelton, at the 1st of April this year we had 84 million of earmarked reserves set aside for purposes and intentions that we might we want to spend it on. It is within the power and remit of the Cabinet to look at and to reserves in total and to reprioritise those, to add it to general fund balance or the budget risk reserve. If we have this situation where we have a number of years where the government does not fund us to the level that it should and the commitments it made, then obviously there'd be a drawdown on that 84 million of earmarked reserves, which would inevitably, as they get lower, would impact on the financial sustainability. But we do have 84 million of earmarked reserves and 10 million of general fund balances, so that is 95 million. That it is in the remit of the Cabinet, in the financial envelope that we have, to consider the deployment of those reserves. So that's a bit of a technical answer, Councillor Shanker. Obviously we want to try and achieve everything that they were set aside for, but we are in this unprecedented, unreal time with a lot of volatility and uncertainty about the future of local government finance, not here in Derby but nationally.
Andy Smith, then, did you want to comment on the predictability of overspends in children's?
Yeah, I can come in, because clearly the significant majority of the overspend that's forecast sits within children's services and sits within the costs of children being in the care system. I guess if we went back to the NTFP, just to pick up on your first point, Councillor Shanker, if we go back to the formation of the NTFP, which was approved at Council back in February, we identified £7 million worth of pressures over a 3-year period. And when we were forming a view about what to go out for consultation with in relation to the pressures, at that particular point in time, we had a 2 million pressure on the agency placement budget, because we'd seen a growth in LAC numbers in 2018-19 and in the first part of 2019-20, which was largely a result of the growth in unaccompanied asylum-seeking children because of the impact of Laverstock Court opening. So we saw, a jump of around 60 to 70 young people in the care system. So that had a big impact on the agency budget. We had a slight growth in other LAC that were not UASC, but the majority of the growth we saw in unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. Also at the point in Q3 last year, our LAC numbers were steadying at around 570. So we felt that on the balance of the impact that some of the work that's outlined in section 4.214 was beginning to have around demand management. We were seeing more foster carers come in. We were trying to work with what is a broken care market across the country, but within the D2N2 area in a more considered way. We felt that was a reasonable pressure or assumption to make. But then what happened in Q4 is the LAC numbers increased. We had to make some decisions to temporarily close 2 of our children's homes for reasons related to matching of children and also some staffing issues to resolve. And then we went straight into the COVID pandemic. The challenge we've got at the moment in terms of the forecast overspend is that some of that is to do with COVID specifically, and we would forecast that about 2.5 million of that overspend is COVID linked because we've got children that are stuck in placements longer than would ordinarily be the case, because the government have said that children shouldn't move placements, because we have to ensure that children who turn 18 stay put. We've also had foster carers who are shielding, who can't take extra kids, so we've had to place in the private sector, and the costs in the private sector are going through the roof because of the fact that the market is so challenged at the moment. We've also had some temporary cost pressures because of the closure of the 2 homes. That's temporary. The homes open, the first home this month, the second home in October. So that I would see as temporary pressures on the budget. But there is a base problem of probably around 3 million because of the increase in LAC that we've seen. We can't put all of the increase in LAC purely to COVID, but I think the worry that we've got, and the worry that my professional association, the ADCS, have got, is that the whole system, the whole country is seeing the impact of the pandemic really on family circumstances, and the demand that we're seeing in the system already, exceeds what we were seeing pre-COVID, and that's likely to increase as children start to get back into school, start to be seen by universal services. So, the LAC numbers could increase, but, the work that is outlined in 4214 is really, really important. And I think the point to emphasise, which I think is quite unique to Derby, is that we are tackling these issues as a council corporately. We're not seeing this as a problem in children's social care, but this has to be a council-wide solution to what is some really systemic challenges that were challenging before COVID, but I think become even more of an issue. I think it's also worth pointing, Chair, just the following point to make is that the ADCS, the Association Director of Children's Services, are currently putting forward robust evidence to the comprehensive spending review in relation to the likely costs and gap in the system. The LGA in 2018 said there was a 3.1 billion gap in children's social care for the next 3 years. That's probably now, we're estimating, in excess of 4 million, maybe 4.2, 4.3 because of the impact of COVID. And this is an issue that every DCS in the land at the moment is trying to grapple with and tackle, but it is challenging.
Thank you, Andy. So that gives us some idea of why we are where we are, and with the best will in the world, I don't think anybody, not even Councillor Eldred, could have predicted what happened this year. So we are. Does that answer your questions, Councillor Shanker?
It does, Chair, but it's an interesting point you make there, because what Councillor Eldred predicted is what would happen this year. She predicted there'd be an overspend to the council's revenue budget, and she's absolutely correct in predicting that. I think Andy, not in
this way.
There's a structural problem, or there still remains a structural problem with the budgets for people services, particularly younger people.
Okay. Councillor Ralston, you've indicated you want to speak. Was that on Councillor Shanker's points, or should I take Councillor Repton?
Chair, I think I indicated I wish to speak as well.
Sorry, I was talking on Maggie's
Martin,
points.
yes, I'm just clarifying with Councillor Ralston if she wanted to speak to Councillor Shanker's points before I brought you in for your points.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Apologies. Yes, in relation to your point, your actual question was relating to the reserves and the use of reserves. And as Simon, Mr. Ali has pointed out, the reserves itself isn't just the 10 million or the 8 million of currently available. It is a combination of a variety of individual reserves, and as part of our budget setting going forward, a combination of suggestions and motivations will be planned to look at both the risk reserves that have been allocated to see if those are still in need, and also a variety of other aspects around savings within the council, spend to save type savings that won't hit the sort of on the ground footfall of the impact of the council. There's a variety of ways. There is no one answer. There is no clear amount of money that we can save. It's a very difficult situation, unprecedented. We won't have faced anything like the economic challenges that we've had since before World War II that will come from this COVID pandemic, should I say. So we have to be realistic in what we're doing going forward, and that will involve some big changes, and that's what we're working towards over the next 3 months while we set our budget.
Okay, thank you. So, yes, Councillor Repton, your opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the concerns about the reserves was raised last night, and this worrying use of the reserves, which is simply not sustainable as we move forward. And a one-off grant by the government, whilst welcome, will certainly only delay the inevitable by 1 year if it's just a 1 year's amount of funding. The concerns raised last night were answered by Councillor Ralston, and that's why there was no recommendation. And that was the concerns were that there's a predicted £10 to £20 million black hole, which could only be filled in 3 ways, and that was a 15% increase in council tax.
Sorry, Martin, if I could just come in. These were your concerns. I think that's clear to say. It wasn't approved by the scrutiny.
Nicola, if I could just, because I think I just want your colleagues to confirm what you said, because you said yes, it would be all three. Now it's a 15% increase in council.
No, I said it could potentially be a combination.
Services, or an increase in the base government grants to Derby City Council. And you said, when asked, you said it would be all three.
I said it could potentially. There is no one answer, which is exactly what I've just said, Martin. And as I said to you at yesterday's meeting, with the recommendation that came through, the opportunity was there. I gave you an answer and explained that the answer would be the same today as it was yesterday.
So what you said last night would be all three of those?
No, what I said last night...
Just a minute, Matt, just a second. Councillor Repton, I'm sorry, but they were your recommendations that you took to exec scrutiny last night, which weren't agreed and didn't come forward.
Because Councillor Ralston reassured that all three would be sorted by all three of those.
So
no,
there's no point.
Potentially a combination.
It's on YouTube.
So there's no point. There's no point in debating it now, is there? Because we're not going to say, you ask us, are we going to support Councillor Ralston? No, we don't. We think she's completely wrong.
I'm not asking you that. I was asking you.
We're not debating the subject now, Councillor.
No. Just asking you to confirm, and then to go on to say, well, where will those cuts take place, and how much will the council tax increase be?
Well, let's give us a piece of string and find out how long that is, shall we?
Councillor Repton, can I just say one thing? Look, you and me, we've had many debates in the chamber about council tax. You know full well this administration will never in a million years propose a 15% council tax increase. So I know where you're going with this, but please be sure you cannot say we are going to increase council tax by 15%. I am absolutely telling you that is not going to be the case, okay? So you can have that on the record.
May I answer?
This is not announced. This is not amounting to a
So if it's not 15% council tax, then
Councillors, it's Emily Feenan speaking. Could I please ask that you respect the chair? The chair, especially in a remote meeting setting, the chair needs to say who will speak when, so that the public who are listening to this debate can follow it. It's very difficult when we're remotely. Chair, please continue.
Thank you. Exactly my point. We're not in a position. This isn't leading to a constructive debate or informative debate for the public. It was debated last night at scrutiny. So, Councillor Repton, unless you've got any other constructive contribution to make that doesn't relate to what was discussed last night, I'm going to move on.
Make the point. Thank you.
Thank you. You always do, Martin. Right. So, moving on. We need then to, if that's okay, and in the absence of any other questions.
Chair, can I just ask one more question on the dedicated schools grant, please?
I'll come back to you in a minute, Councillor Shank, because I've got indications that Paul Simpson, you wanted to chip in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, I think a lot of this has already been said, but I think it's important that we all recognise and acknowledge this is an unprecedented set of circumstances, and I think it's fair to say that the government will no doubt be considering a whole range of options to support local government. I know that the Secretary of State has said publicly that he will fight local government's corner in terms of spending review and obviously discussions with the Treasury, which is always a challenge. But I think we've submitted proposals to government. I know Simon's been involved in conversations with senior civil servants about the potential to kind of spread the cost of COVID over a period of years, and the government has gone some way in that, in terms of allowing the collection fund deficit to be spread over a period of years, and they may well be coming forward with other proposals over the course of the next few months as a means of giving local authorities support, both direct support, perhaps in terms of additional funding. There may well be additional funding to support social care in particular, and there may well be other proposals as well that come forward. So I think this budget round is going to be quite unique, certainly in my experience, and I would imagine in all our experiences. So I think we've got to consider the possibility of a range of options coming forward, which we'll probably have to work our way through. And there will probably be a combination of things that we need to do to balance the books going forward. So just to make that point, Chair, that I think it's clear that Derby is in comparative terms against other local authorities. Our financial position is really challenging, of course, but in comparative terms we're in reasonable shape. Derby hasn't gone down the track of what a lot of, certainly some of the smaller districts have done in recent times, of going into the kind of commercial borrowing and investing, and that's put some of our fellow district councils in the parts of the south of the country in a really difficult financial position. We haven't done that, thankfully. And therefore, yes, of course, our financial position is challenging, but this is a national issue. It's just not just an issue for Derby City Council. Every local authority up and down the land is staring at the challenges that COVID has brought. So I think it's important that we view this in that context. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Good point. Well made. Not an ideal position, but it could be worse, as it might be a conclusion there, I suppose. So I'm going to go back to the paper and deal with that. No, Councillor Shanker, you thought of something else, did you?
I did. So the DSG grant in point E of the summary suggests we could be, or likely to be, at a deficit for the end of the financial year. What implications does that have on the council to have the DSG in deficit?
Mr. Riley?
The dedicated schools grant is that there used to be a caveat that if the DSG was to go significantly into deficit, there would be the requirement for the council to come up with a DSG recovery plan, and there was worries amongst the professional bodies that could then impact on the general fund of the council, as you in a sense crossed over dedicated schools grant and the general fund. That has been removed, but if you go back to the budget report that we presented in February, we talked about the demand and the high needs block, changes in central services allocations, but we also highlighted there the commitment by all partners, parents and other agencies to create a new narrative, a new framework around the high needs block, because this is not just a council response of funding education, healthcare plans and everything else. It is, as I think Andy described with the children's social care, a whole city approach to sort of the high needs block. many, again, picking up the analysis, many councils have a deficit DSG as a result of the increasing demands on high needs. We hope that we can fund the high needs pressure if required this year from our DSG surplus, but that the changes that we will have will mitigate the impact of that in respect of delivering a deficit DSG in future years. But I would put the caveat, as we have said previously, that we're coming back into schools, receiving, assessing children and everything else post-COVID. So whether there is a demand in the system that is still to materialise, we will have to wait and see. But at the moment, the high needs block is pressure is generally funded from the DSG reserve that we had. I hope that explains it. If not, I'm sure Andy Smith could add more detail.
Does that answer you, Councillor Shanker?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, in that case, then I'll go back to the papers, and we have to note 2.1 and approve 2.2. Can we approve, Cabinet?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, moving on then, we have an item 13, confidential item, just in relation to the financials on the purchase of the houses. So I have to, at item 12, declare that the board, ask that the board resolve that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, that the press and public be excluded from the meeting during the discussion of the following item on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So whilst we make sure that we are no longer online, I'm sure Mr. Huff can confirm when that is done.